Hello and welcome to the Crisis Point podcast. I'm Eric Sammons, your host and the editor-in-chief of Crisis Magazine. Welcome to today's episode of the Crisis Point podcast. And I just want to encourage people to like and subscribe, as I always do. We're streaming live on these solo podcasts. We stream live on YouTube and on Odyssey, on Facebook and on Twitter. And I encourage you to watch whichever one's most convenient for you. But also make sure you subscribe on those channels as well. We're on a lot of different social media channels these days. Typically, our handle is just Crisis Mag. Twitter at Gitter, at Parler, at Gab, and everywhere else. So anyway, follow us there and make sure you like this video and others like them as well. If you're listening on podcast to the audio, make sure you subscribe to our channel and let other people know about it. So I'd appreciate it. Okay, so let's get started then. Today, I'm going to talk about the Great Resignation. This is something that's been in the news recently, and you may or may not have heard of it. I picked it up at a few different places. People started talking about it. There's been some articles about it. And essentially, the Great Resignation is a term for the fact that record numbers of Americans are quitting their jobs and have been quitting their jobs over the past few months. In November 2021, which is the last month that we have data for, 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs. And you might not have that number in context, not know what it might mean, but that's the highest ever since they've been recording this. I believe they started recording this number in around 2001. So for 20 years worth of data, this is the highest number of Americans who have ever quit their job in 1 month. And in fact, it's also the first time in November was over 1 million people quit their jobs in the leisure and hospitality industry. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The fact that of these quits, that's what they're kind of technically called, people quitting their job quits. Over 1 million people quit their job in the hospitality and leisure industry, but 4.5 million people. And I'm going to pull up a chart here for those who are watching, and I'll explain it for those who are listening. And this shows the number of people who quit each month from the beginning of this time, 2021, until now. And you can see, if you're looking at it, there's a sharp increase over the past few months, and the largest ever, basically 2021. And if you're looking at the chart, you'll see some gray areas. Those are recessions. And you notice there's always a dip, and we'll talk about this in a second, number of quits during recessions, but then it increases. And there's been a huge spike, though, this past year. And so people are calling it the Great Resignation. And another thing about this is that it's at least being touted as part of an anti-work movement. And I'll talk about that in a little bit as well, the anti-work movement. And so the most commonly thought idea for this, all these people quitting their jobs, I should say maybe the boomer explanation. I am not a boomer, by the way, for those who see all my gray hairs. I am Gen X and proud of it. But, maybe I act boomer sometimes. But one of the most common explanations, it's basically a bunch of lazy Gen Z people, kids who are basically quitting because they don't like their jobs and they're just sitting at home, getting their Biden bucks, their enhanced stimulus money from the government. And they're like, well, it's easier just to stay at home and make money from doing nothing from the government than actually going out there and getting a job. If you're getting paid, let's say $12 an hour at your local, at your local restaurant or something, to work at a local fast food restaurant, wherever the case may be, but you're getting, I don't know, maybe $8 an hour to sit at home, well, then you're much more likely to just sit at home. A lot of people would be, because what's that $4 an hour isn't really worth it to you to go out there and work. So that's the common explanation often given, or at least a stereotype of this anti-work movement, of the idea of the Great Resignation, all these people quitting their jobs. However, if you look at the actual data, that's not really the case. That's not really what's driving it. Yes, there are some people definitely that this has occurred, where there are some people who are quitting their jobs, staying at home, just doing nothing. So I think that is true. Somebody in the comments just called me boomer adjacent, and I'm triggered by that. So anyway, I think there's other reasons, though. I think if you look at the data of why people are quitting and what they're doing after they quit, I think we're going to see that that's not really that stereotype of them just all sitting at home eating Doritos and watching television while they collect their stimulus money. It isn't really the case. Their unemployment checks. What we find is a number of factors for reasons that people are leaving their jobs. One is a lot of people are just getting better jobs. And that's a reason a lot of people quit. Now, remember, this is people are quitting. It's not unemployment. So a lot of these people quitting are actually just getting better jobs. And so there's nothing, obviously, I don't think anybody would say there's anything wrong with that. There's no real moral failing or any problem with somebody going from one job to a better job. So that's one reason. Another reason is that people are moving their retirement up. There's actually been studies that have shown that people are retiring a little bit earlier. COVID, we're going to see in a lot of these reasons, COVID had at least an impact in it, that people kind of realized that there's more to life maybe than work. And so they were nearing retirement age anyway. And so they moved up when they retired. So that's another reason why people were quitting. A lot of people didn't quit during the lockdowns due to uncertainty during the recession of the lockdowns. And this is something, let me pull up that chart again. If you notice during recession, so in 2001, in 2008, 2009, and also in 2020, we see there's a drop in the number of quits. Because the fact is during recessions, people have uncertainty. And so they're not quite sure whether or not they should be, whether or not they should be, they're not really thinking about quitting because they're like, I have a job. I don't really want to look for another job because there's uncertainty out there. I don't know if I just want to keep what I have because I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And you could see this, that people don't quit during that time. But then what happens is there's this pent up demand. We see that there was an increase each time that or at least after 2008, 2009, and in particularly after 2020, there was like an increase in the number of quits because people who basically wanted to leave their jobs, but they're like the uncertainty of the recession, of COVID lockdowns, whatever, were made them hold back. Well, then all of a sudden now they have, once things got a little bit more normal, they were like, okay, let's go. I'm going to go ahead and quit. And so we see a pent up demand as well. We also see, like I mentioned before, over 1 million of those 4.5 million quits in November were from the hospitality industry. And if there's one industry that's been hit very hard, and this includes like restaurants and things like that, hotels, what have you, if there's one industry that's been hit very hard by COVID lockdowns and the whole COVID regime and COVID pandemic, it would be that industry because it's often a very low paying industry. However, there's a high demand on them, particularly to do things like they have to wear masks, they have to deal with, no matter how they stand, if they're a person who doesn't really want to wear masks and deal with all that, they have to wear masks and deal with all that. But if they're the person who's very maybe frightened of the pandemic and don't want to get catch COVID or something like that, well, this is an area where they would do it. And so they would quit that job. So I think that's another factor, is a lot of people leaving that, leaving obviously the hospitality industry. Also, I think this is something that's not thought of as much. A lot of people are leaving their jobs for industry, for basically working for themselves in kind of non-traditional, non-track jobs. And I'm talking about people like in YouTube and Instagram influencers. People are starting to make, and they're not starting, but they're making money on that. And they're making real money that they can live off of. So they're quitting their traditional job and basically just staying at home and doing their YouTube thing, their Instagram thing, items like that. And that is a reason why people are quitting their jobs. They're starting to do that. Another non-traditional, non-track job is you cannot discount the fact that people are making money in cryptocurrency and also in stocks by trading it at home. I know people like this, and there's definitely many stories of this. I mean, I think I just saw where, how many was it? There's over 100,000 Bitcoin millionaires or something like that, something crazy like that. So people are leaving their jobs to basically live off of crypto, maybe live off of stock trades and things like that. So that's another reason. A lot of people are starting their own business, and so they're quitting their job. In fact, I have a chart here. Let me show another chart. This is a monthly business application. So this is Census Bureau basically saying how many people are starting their own business. And if you can see, if you're listening, I'll just have to tell you, but if you're looking at, you can see this huge increase Basically after COVID started, after the lockdowns released, lots and lots of people started their own businesses. Now, most small businesses fail. I'm somebody I've actually started a couple different businesses. Fortunately, none of them failed. I did stop each of them over time. And so I know how hard it can be to have a small business. But a lot of people are starting their own small business. And so they're not, they're quitting their jobs and doing that. And so that's another factor that we're seeing. Now, when I was doing research on all the different reasons why people are leaving their job, one that was not mentioned, but I think is definitely the case, is the mandates, is the threat and the actual implementation of vaccine mandates. As I've mentioned before, I helped start a foundation, Holy Faith Foundation, that is helping people who have lost their jobs due to the mandates, give them some financial assistance. So I've seen stories. People have written to us direct stories of people who have lost their jobs because of the vaccine mandates. Now, you won't find in your typical corporate press stories about this. They won't mention that one, of course, because that wouldn't help the narrative very much. But there are definitely people who are leaving their jobs. Now, here's the thing. Is that a quit or is that a termination? Well, here's the crazy thing is it's usually probably going to be called a quit, because what I've seen is that most of these companies that are enforcing these mandates, they're not saying that you're terminated if you refuse to get the vaccine. What they're saying is you self-terminated. You chose to not work here anymore by not getting the vaccine. It's an Orwellian attempt by their HR departments to basically not have to deal with the fact that you got fired. And so they're basically saying you quit because you didn't get the vaccine. Obviously, that's just some crazy language that just tries to get them out of some legal problems, I think. So those people would also be considered quitting. And I do know people who quit their jobs because a mandate was looming and they didn't think they'd get the religious exemption, or maybe they just didn't want to work for a company that mandated the vaccine. So what we see there, though, is a lot of different reasons why people are quitting their jobs. It's not just one answer. It's not just, Gen Z people being lazy or anything like that. It's a lot of different factors why you can't, why people are leaving their jobs. Somebody also mentioned in the comments, let me just put this up real quick. Gig jobs. Yep. The gig economy, food and grocery deliveries to serve stay-at-home, stay-safe population. I was making $200 a night during the 2020 lockdown. Yeah, Darius says this. And so absolutely, that's kind of one of these non-traditional type jobs. I mean, it is technically a job, but people are realizing they can make some good money doing basically delivering food and Uber and things like that. And so they're doing that and they're quitting their jobs because it's a more flexible job. They like it better than doing what they normally were doing. So, but there's another factor that is, I don't know if it's another factor, but I'd say there's something underlying a lot of this, though, that's underlying a lot of these job quits that we're seeing. And that's the anti-work movement. Now, this is something you might not have heard of, but it's growing like crazy. There's a subreddit on Reddit, the anti-work subreddit, cleverly named, I guess. And it has ballooned during COVID, since COVID. It has now over 1.6 million subscribers on it. And just a year, I guess 2 years ago, it only had maybe a couple 100,000. So it has grown dramatically, this anti-work movement. And basically, let me give the anti-work movement from how they would market it, so to speak. It's basically the idea that you work as little as possible and you prioritize leisure time. So instead of spending time at the office, you're spending time on yourself. And this is a very popular idea that work is just not that important to life. And so let's do more to promote leisure. And what you see in the anti-work movement is this idea that work isn't really necessary. And it's actually it has a Marxist foundation. I know it's easy to throw out the Marxist label on things and say, oh, that's a Marxist basis, stuff like that. And it's often true. But in this case, it definitely has a Marxist idea because in the Marxist idea is that eventually we will evolve beyond being required to work. Now, I don't know how this magically happens, that things get done if nobody's working, or maybe it's just certain people don't have to work. But it's this idea, though, that work is an evil that we can get rid of, that we basically should be focused more on leisure and things of that nature. Now, it also is part of the anti-work movement is the idea of working a better job. working a job that is less soul crushing, that is less evil, less difficult, maybe something that's more fulfilling, working something more fulfilling. One of the things that you see in the anti-work subreddit is lots of complaints about crappy jobs, typically corporate jobs, but just lots of complaints about the work environment, about the about work. I'm sorry, the work environment of corporate world, and the problems of that. Now, I will say that the anti-work movement is something that's only possible in today's world. And what I mean by that is there's never been a time when more people could spend more time on leisure than there is today. And I will say, just real quick, that is because of capitalism. Because a lot of people in the anti-work movement are anti-capitalist. Well, they wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the fact that capitalism has brought about this ability to work less and make more. I mean, the fact that we have technologies and everything that we can work so much, we can work little for a big return compared to maybe 100 years ago. Just think about somebody at home, all the work you'd have to do just to maintain your home, to wash the clothes, to feed yourself, to take care of the house, all that stuff. There's so much less that's taken care of now through technology. So, which is because of capitalism. And so I do want to say that that's one thing that's a major problem with the anti-work movement, is they don't recognize that they wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for capitalism. I do think also that there's this idea, there is a materialism here, that not only do we want leisure, we want all our stuff. We still want Amazon to deliver to us our things. We still want to have our food delivered to us. We still want to be able to go out and eat and things like that. But we don't want to have to work for it. I think there is some inherent, here's my warning, my boomer adjacent statement here. I do think there's some basic laziness also behind this anti-work movement. The idea that I want all my stuff, I want to just be able to relax, but I don't want to have to work for it. And so I do think that's part of it. I don't think that's all of it, but I do think that's a big part of it. But I do think also part of the anti-work movement is there's some decent legitimacy to part of it. And you'll see this in some people, they just want to live more simply. They don't want to have need to have a lot of stuff. They become more minimalistic, less materialistic, and they realize, I don't need to work 60 hours a week to make all this money, to buy all these things that don't make me happy. That's a good impulse right there. That's a very Catholic impulse right there, to be honest. The idea that we don't have to have all this stuff to make us happy. And so I think that's part of the anti-work movement as well. And I think that's a legitimate part of it. And so the problem, though, is, of course, if we really fulfilled this anti-work movement, these people stop working, somebody still has to work. And so it creates like a class system where on the high classes are people who don't have to work. They can stay at home, they can travel, they can do their leisure, but somebody's got to supply them with all the stuff they need to do this, all the food and all the housing and clothes and all that stuff they need to be able to live like that. And so we have a class system where on the top you have the people who don't have to work, but then everybody who has to work is supporting them and living the life they're saying is so terrible. And honestly, it probably becomes a America, Western world, first world country type thing over the third world. We have people in China, maybe the slaves in China making things for us. We have people in the other, in third world countries making things for us so that we can live more simply or live more a leisurely life. So I think that's a real issue there. Now, part of the anti-work movement that is driving all this, the Great Resignation and this idea of against work, I do think they have, like I said, some legitimate issues that I think some legitimate problems. And I think one of them is recognizing the soul-crushing, degrading aspects of a lot of modern-day corporate work. It is not natural, it is not human to have to sit in front of a computer all day in a cubicle and do basically this mindless work. There's something very degrading about that. And I understand people hate that. I've been very fortunate. I haven't had to have a job like that except for as an internship in college, and I hated every second of it. I've been fortunate enough not to have jobs like that. But I do know people who have, and I do know what the work is like, and it is soul crushing. It is a very, it's something to resist. It's something that we should not be thinking like, oh, this is a good thing. I mean, you're going through, it's like living through a Dilbert cartoon. I mean, we make fun of it, but it actually does create a very poor environment for human flourishing. And so I think there's a legitimate reason to be against that. Now, note, I'm talking about soul-crushing work. I'm not talking about menial work. So there's a difference between maybe somebody who gets paid a lot to sit in a cubicle and sit and stare at his computer and file reports all day and be in stupid meetings all day and deal with all the wokeness of corporate America and all that crap. And somebody maybe who's a janitor or a garage man or something, a garbage man or something like that. I think there's a clear difference. Being a janitor or a garbage man or something that's we would consider menial work, there is something still very uplifting and very wholesome about that in comparison to somebody who just sits in front of their cubicle all day. And so I think what we need to do is we need to understand that and recognize that. I also think that COVID has revealed so much in our world today. It really has. And I do think COVID has revealed this a lot, that people, because of of COVID itself, the mortality of it that brings to mind, and also the lockdowns and the freedoms we've lost, people start to recognize what's more important in life. And they realize their dumb job just isn't worth it anymore. The money they're making from it just does not really coincide with what it brings to their life. And so what they want to do is they want to escape from that. And I think that is understandable. And I think also, I think there is in America particularly, there's always been this strain, this Protestant work ethic strain, that we make work almost a religion. We make work identify who we are. I remember I was living in Washington, D.C. The first question you asked when you met somebody or somebody met you was, where do you work? That's what defines you. Now, fortunately, living in the Midwest, I don't see that as much. I get questions like, where'd you go to high school? Where I live. But the idea that where you work identifies you is really a very harmful way to look at the human person. Work is very important, but it doesn't define us. It doesn't identify who we are. Obviously, I'm not talking about vocations, like vocation to the priesthood or vocation to parenthood or something like that. I'm talking about jobs defining who we are. But when that happens, when they do that, they start to realize how empty that is, that does not really bring fulfillment to them. And so they want to leave that. So again, that's something I think the anti-work movement taps into and sees as a legitimate problem. And I also think people just kind of recognize these days that things aren't right in the world. And things are just not doing well in the world with both COVID, with the craziness of culture, the idea that you're supposed to say that a man is a woman if he wants to be called a woman, all these crazy things that are happening. People realize things aren't right. And so they are trying to go back to the basics and say, what makes me happy? Now, unfortunately, a lot of times they don't know what makes them happy, what would make them truly happy, what would give them peace, which is, of course, only Jesus Christ, which gives true peace and lasting peace and happiness to anybody. They don't know that, but they're looking for it. And that's a good thing. That's something I think as Catholics we need to tap into and recognize that they're looking for it. Now, this all being said, what is the Catholic view then? What is the Catholic perspective on work and on the idea of the value we get from work and how we identify with our work and things like that? Well, in the Catholic faith, work is essential. Work is part of the plan God has for the world. I think people forget that work actually precedes the fall. It came before the fall, not after the fall. In Genesis, let me pull this up real quick. In Genesis 1, remember, Genesis 3 is when the fall happened. It says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. This is God talking to the human race. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. Well, you can't subdue the earth if you don't work. And so here we have already God commands work of Adam from the beginning, before the fall. And so work is something that is a gift from God. It is not something we as Catholics, you cannot be anti-work. You might be anti certain types of work, but you can't be anti-work itself, because work is actually a gift from God. Now, however, with the fall, what we read is, this is the Lord speaking to Adam again after the fall. Because you've listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. In the sweat of your face You shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. So by the sweat of your face, in other words, now work would be something that would be hard. It would be difficult. It would bring suffering to us. Work would not be something that coincides with who we are. We resist it. First of all, part of the reason work is hard is because now we don't like it. We're lazy. We weren't lazy before the fall. Now we are. And so what we see is that work becomes work. We think of work as a negative word, and it did become a negative word after the fall. Before the fall, it wasn't, but afterwards it is. And so what we see there is that work has value, but it has been made difficult by the fall. Now, all of us, therefore, however, because of the way God made us, all of us are called to work. Every single human being is called to work. Now, by work, I don't mean a job. I don't mean a paying job. The stay-at-home mom has the most important work in the world. She's not getting paid for it. She's not leaving her house, but yet she has a great value in her work. The janitor has work. The CEO has valuable work. Basically, as long as it's moral work, obviously working at Planned Parenthood or being a prostitute, that is not moral work. That is not legitimate work. But as long as it's honest work, legitimate work, moral work, then it has value. And it's something that we need to embrace. Now, one of my favorite saints when it comes to the theology of work, so to speak, is St. Jose Maria Escriva, who is the founder of Opus Dei. I know that we probably have different opinions about Opus Dei in this audience, but I think if you read the writings of St. Jose Maria Escriva when it comes to work, I think you find a lot of value in them. In fact, I found so much value in them. I literally wrote a book about it. And so let's just plug it. Let me see if I can pull it up here where in the lights. Okay, Holiness for Everyone, the Practical Spirituality of St. Jose Maria Escriva. I just want to note that I'm not a member of Opus Dei, never have been. I just find value in the writings of St. Jose Maria, and particularly when it comes to work, because I think one thing, particularly Catholic men, have always struggled with is how to reconcile their work with their faith life. That a lot of times they might, especially people who don't work in the church, I'm obviously working kind of in the Catholic world now, but I've had a number of jobs where I did not. And it can be a struggle. Like, how do I reconcile that with my faith? And St. Jose Maria does a great job of doing that. And he also just teaches us about the value of work. Let me just read one thing that he wrote. This is from Christ is Passing By, number 47. Work is part and parcel of man's life on earth. It involves effort, weariness, exhaustion, signs of the suffering and struggle that accompany human existence, and that point to the reality of sin and need for redemption. But in itself, work is not a penalty or a curse or a punishment. Those who speak of it that way have not understood sacred scripture properly. Like I said, work came before the fall. It is time for us Christians to shout from the rooftops that work is a gift from God, and it makes no sense to classify men differently according to their occupation, as if some jobs are nobler than others. Amen to that. All work, bears witness to the dignity of man, to his dominion over creation. It is an opportunity to develop one's personality. It is a bond of union with others, the way to support one's family, a means of aiding in the improvement of the society in which we live and the progress of all humanity. And so work, really, what we see here is that work is a gift. It is something that we need to value. We cannot be part of an anti-work movement as Catholics. Now, we can decry soul-crushing work. We can decry the conditions of many places of work where maybe workers are exploited. I don't mean this in the Marxist fashion, but where workers are not treated well. We can decry that. We can resist that. We can fight against that. But we can't fight against work itself. We need to embrace work. And in fact, leisure should not be the driving force of our lives. Leisure is important too. I don't want to act like I don't think leisure is important. Leisure is part of the human experience. And we actually work better when we have some leisure brought in. But we should not work for leisure. We work because that is the way that we serve God. That is what we offer to God. I think it was St. Jose Maria Escriva had this analogy that as the priest, the altar is where he offers his sacrifice. He offers the sacrifice of Jesus Christ himself at the altar. What is the altar for the laity? The altar is your desk at work. The altar is the changing pad for the stay-at-home mom, who's taking care of her kids, or maybe the kitchen sink. Our work might be the garbage truck, the garbage. I mean, I'm serious. This is where our altars are. because this is where we offer up ourselves to God, is through our work. This is the proper Catholic understanding of work. Not that it's something to be resisted, to be fought, or think anything like that, but instead it's something to be embraced and to be loved, to really have this true value that we give to work. And so we don't work just to acquire more stuff. In fact, if we have a lot of means, let's say we have a job that pays a lot, you should thank God and you should give a lot of it away. And I think that's really the Catholic calling. Now, I just want to be very clear here. I'm not saying the government should come and take your money and give it away. I'm saying that you should voluntarily give a lot of it away. We should be very generous with any extra money that we are given that go beyond what we need to support our families, which is different, by the way. How we support our families, a single person who lives in an apartment in Kansas City is very different from a family of 7 who live in New York. What they need to support their families, support themselves, is going to be very different. But the point here is, though, that we work and we value our work. Now, that does not mean we don't leave our jobs, and at times, and maybe find a better job. There's nothing wrong with that either. I do think if we're constantly trying to figure out everything wrong with our current employment, I think that's an unhealthy attitude to have. It's not a very Catholic attitude to have. But obviously, if we have better opportunities elsewhere, if we have jobs that are very difficult and make it hard for us to live our family lives, for example, then yes, we should be looking for other work. For example, let's say you have a job that you work Sundays all the time and you can't get the Mass with your family. I think that's something that, try to find a different job. Obviously, there are some jobs that have to be done on Sundays. You can't have hospitals closed on Sundays or anything like that. But I do think, though, in general, if you can, you should try not to work on Sundays, obviously. And so I really think that I think there's a lot of reasons that we as Catholics should really resist the anti-work movement, but understand the underpinnings of it, understand the reasons behind it, sometimes legitimate reasons behind the anti-work movement, and the reason why people are quitting their jobs, and hopefully for better jobs, but sometimes just because they're just tired of work. And I know we all get tired of work, every single one of us, but I think we should keep this in mind, that work is this gift that we've been given by God, and we really should embrace it, as much as possible. And like I said, again, work is not always paid work. We're talking about, if you're working for a job, or if you're just working to support and taking care of your family, for example, taking care of your parents, your elderly parents, something like that. That's all work that we should embrace and see the value of, and make it our means of becoming holy. That's the key that St. Jose Maria was saying, is that work is not an obstacle to holiness unless you make it one. Work is the means to obtain holiness. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope that you've learned something from this about the Great Resignation, about the anti-work movement, but most importantly about the Catholic perspective of work, and why we need to really see work as a gift from God that leads us back to Him. Okay, everybody, until next time, God love you.